Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about St. John's wort. For some people, it might have worked well, and then for other people, it didn't work at all, or it overstimulated them. So we're going to talk about those two other reasons and how you could prevent that and make it work better for you. So the first one that we're going to talk about is why St. John's wort may not have worked. Well, St. John's wort has a component called hyperforin that is well known for the mood boosting properties, and it is well extracted in alcohol or oil. So if you had a version of St. John's wort that was not one of those two, that could have been potentially why you didn't get the mood boosting properties as much. Some capsule forms do try to make sure that they're standardizing for the hyperforeign and they'll say it on the back label. Other ones, not so much. It may be in there, it may not be. Right. So previous generations would soak St. John's wort for weeks in a capped bottle of oil out in the sun. Now you could go to the health food store and find an alcohol extraction of St. John's wort. It would be a liquid version, essentially, of St. John's wort, also known as a tincture. So consider that if you're not seeing the results that you'd expect from St. John's wort, or maybe you had an experience where it did work for you, and then later on it didn't work for you. You might want to think about, was it a different brand when it actually worked? And was that potentially an alcoholic extraction versus maybe what you have now could potentially be maybe a glycerin extraction? You could look on the back of the label and see whether or not it was alcohol or glycerin. So consider essentially an alcohol extraction um, of St. John's wort. The other thing to consider, like I mentioned, with the overstimulation that for some people might occur when they take St. John's wort. So you might feel more anxious or restless, or there's just something kind of rising up. I'm going to talk about that part in a different light versus if you took it with medication. So if you were already on medications for depression, such as the class of medications that are SSRIs, these enhance serotonin. And if you're taking that with St. John's wort, you might be having too much serotonin, and maybe you could potentially run into serotonin syndrome. Don't do that. But I'm going to talk about another reason why you might experience overstimulation just from the St. John's wort alone, not in tandem with potentially taking medications. St. John's wort does start to activate liver detoxification pathways, and it's a very potent stimulator of the phase one detoxification pathway. If your phase two detoxification pathway, both occurring, um, if the phase two detoxification pathway is sluggish, then you're kind of doing this, right? And you can essentially have a bottleneck, and that can lead to some overstimulation. So you might feel that wired, restless, anxious, overstimulated type of feeling. I have seen products work on this overstimulation feeling in two different ways. One is that they will just combine St. John's wort with other calming herbs. And that's a decent way to do it because a lot of times people who are dealing with depression may also be dealing with anxiety, right? And sometimes anxiety is so much that it just leads to the depression. Your body's just exhausted from being anxious, and so it's also depressed, right? I mean, so uh, a person can have both, and it can be nice to have something that works on both of those areas. And so you can see where that might be useful to combine St. John's wort with other calming herbs, such as valerian, passionflower, skullcap, lemon balm, etc. The other way is to combine it with various herbs or compounds that help with phase two detoxification. So you might have seen it in a product that combines St. John's wort with vitamin B6, right? Some other compounds that could work would be milk thistle, which is an herb, berry, which is an herb, sulforaphane, which comes from broccoli seed extract, and as well as N-acetylcysteine, also known as NAC. NAC works great for a lot of people for a number of different reasons. However, for some people, for a totally other reason, NAC can be overstimulating as well. So if you run into that, just know that that just may not be the one that you want to use at this time. Consider the other ones that I mentioned. Some other pearls of wisdom is when I'm looking at herbs, sometimes I will take the time to look at the color of the flower of that herb. And as you can see from this picture here, the color of St. John's wort flower is yellow. So I'm going to talk about that in two different ways. Um, the solar plexus chakra, for those of you who are aware of the chakras and energetics, the solar plexus chakra is yellow. If you are having imbalances in that chakra, you may have trouble dealing with self-confidence, self-esteem, motivation, as well as ding, 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 depression. Um, Also, let's go into acupuncture. Some of you have probably gone to see acupuncturists, and we're going to talk about traditional Chinese medicine. Um, so, if the stomach and the spleen meridians, the color associated with those meridians within traditional Chinese medicine is yellow. If you're having imbalances, particularly in the spleen meridian, but also the spleen and stomach meridian, you're gonna have just chronic digestive issues. And if you have chronic digestive issues, you might not be making, if now we're kind of transitioning a little bit into more of the Western way of looking at things, but of course a lot of these things overlap. If you have gut issues, you can have mind issues. The gut and the mind are connected. The gut makes a good amount of serotonin. So if your gut is not working well, then you can see why you might not have as much serotonin laying around. St. John's wort helps to boost serotonin. There you go. Um, so it can be nice to look at the color of the flower of an herb because it might start to give you implications about how that herb might benefit you. One other thing to consider is that depression happens for different reasons, and one of those reasons that has been documented is post-viral depression. So think about what happened that might have led to depression. Could be a number of different things, right? This is just one example. For some people, after they've had some sort of virus, that's afterwards, that's when they start to get depressed. Well, guess what? St. John's wort has antiviral properties. It may not work on every single virus, but it's just something to keep in mind that, okay, if you feel like depression started after some sort of viral illness, take the time to do some research and see whether or not St. John's wort might be beneficial for tackling that aspect of depression. Thanks for watching.